On today's show, Tom Wilson and Ryan Reaves, BFFs.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about Lars Eller and his career with the Capitals. 2 different times on this team, and I'd be willing to bet he doesn't want to think about too much this past year and how that played out for the Capitals. But big picture, Stanley Cup 2018 season, Lars Eller was huge. What did he mean for the Caps, and what will he mean for the Sens? I'll talk about that a bit later. Hold on to your hat here if you're wearing a hat. Sidney Crosby, Evgeni Malkin on the Capitals. Wow. But just to get it going here, equally as crazy of a start of this show. So buckle up. Tom Wilson and Ryan Reaves, BFFs. That what was said on the Cam and Strick podcast, that if they had played on the same team together, they might actually even be friends. Isn't that something? When you take the hockey gear off and the lights go down, you put on your street clothes and perhaps have a bit of an adult beverage, that all of a sudden we all can get along. And, oftentimes when I do this show, people talk to me about Tom Wilson, what kind of player he is. And if you're not too knowledgeable about hockey or the Capitals, you're like, I know that Tom Wilson guy. He's like a Ryan Reaves. They're just junkyard dogs. They don't have any skills, right? Not the case. Polar opposites other than the fighting department. Let's just take a look at the back of Ryan Reaves' hockey card for just a moment here. His high water mark in his entire career in 80 games, the 18-19 season, 9 goals. Career total, 63 goals in a career that started in 2010 with the Blues. Tom Wilson, last I checked, this last season, 30 goals. So right there, the tough guy part is the common denominator, but everything else, Tom Wilson has the better skill set. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. And, the thing about Ryan Reaves, I think, is that his whole life, whether it's on the ice or in his day-to-day life, or you got to even kind of think maybe even when he was in school, he was just the big tough guy. You don't want to mess with Ryan Reaves or it's not going to be good for you. And then you got a guy like Tom Wilson, who's big, not afraid of throwing down. And I think that kind of, screws up Ryan Reeves' head. The chemistry in his brain gets all mixed up because I'm the tough guy. So I think that, as far as Tom Wilson, I don't know Ryan Reeves, the man, that well, other than what I see in interviews, rather entertaining. And Tom Wilson, I know from what I see as well. I think he's more mature. And I think that Tom Wilson knows that he has the better skill set. But let's dive into the weeds here in segment 1. An improbable friendship, I guess, is what I could say. And the one thing I never thought I would start segment 1 of Locked On Capitals talking about the friendship between Tom Wilson and Ryan Reaves, but here we go. I said it. Tom Wilson, Ryan Reaves, 2 of the most feared, most hated names on the opposite side of the physicality spectrum. And now they're saying things like, quote, he's a great guy and we'd be friends if we were teammates. It's like I said, it's an interesting thing to say, when you're not on the ice, you're not competing, that can't we all get along? And it's quite interesting how this has changed. I don't know how long time of a Capitals fan you are, but if you're a newer fan, I'll catch you up here a little bit. Let's back it up a second here. This feud between the two goes way back. We're talking about the Stanley Cup in 2018. Reeves, a Golden Knight back then. Wilson, smack dab in the middle. Well, what seemed like every scrum, doing what Willie does best. And Reeves took that loss personally in 2018. And in 2019, he told Jeff Merrick point blank, quote, "I just don't like him," unquote. Simple as that. And why? Why not? Because like I say, Tom Wilson's not the guy that's going to lay down. He will fight Ryan Reeves, and he just don't care. Is there the possibility, that Wilson could lose from time to time against Ryan Reeves? For sure. I'm not saying that, he's going to beat him every time. He's just not scared of him. I think that a majority of other NHL players are. And who could forget that monster blindside hit Reeves laid on Wilson in 18? Sent Wilson's helmet flying. Head slammed the ice. Reeves got a 5-minute major and was tossed. That wasn't a little love tap. That was a message. He wanted to be the guy that solved the Tom Wilson problem. If you remember that, is that when Tom Wilson was newer in the league, he was just seen as that, as the problem. And how are we going to address him and the problem? And, like I said, Tom Wilson has matured a lot. And when you think back to when he started in his career, got suspended a lot. There was the talk, if he doesn't clean up his act, he's going to get kicked out of this league. And, I was listening to the Mike Vogel podcast last summer. And one of the things he told Vogues was, he goes, "I realized I was better served playing on the ice than in the penalty box. I don't need to answer the bell to every fourth line call-up guy that's trying to make a name for himself. I know who I am, and I don't have to do it anymore." So that's the maturity that, you know who you are. You're confident in your masculinity, shall we say. But let's fast forward the whole thing to 2025. And Reeves is on a podcast, the Cam and Strick podcast, calling him a great player, a great guy even, and telling the world they hung out at Chandler Stevenson's wedding. Again, I wasn't there, but if I was going to wager a guess, probably some adult beverages were being consumed. And, well, can't we all just get along? I have a feeling it's quite a bit like that. And the thing of it is, hockey is a weird sport. You can crush a man's soul in front of thousands of fans one year, and you're clinking beer glasses with him 5 years later. It's interesting how things turn out. Reeves even joked he and Wilson absolutely would have been friends if they had never played on the same team. Said 100% we would have. When the podcast host brought it up, that is the exact quote, 100% would have been friends. I guess we'll never know. I don't ever see a reality where Tom Wilson and Ryan Reeves are playing on the same team together. Stranger things have happened. But, you take a look at Reeves, went from Toronto and now he's in San Jose. The guy's bounced around a lot. And, what teams are looking for is a deterrent. And Reeves is that. But he ultimately always gets bounced because at the end of the day, that's all he is, a deterrent. Not a tremendous skill set there, but just kind of that junkyard dog, if you will, on a leash. But Reeves is more, like I said, a fourth liner now. Sure, he's still making headlines, still laying bodies out. That's what he's known for. That's his bread and butter. And they both have that same "I'll run through you if I have to" attitude that's missing in today's game. And, a lot of teams are trying to learn from that, the Reeves, the Wilson. I cannot get over the fact that the Flyers hired a coach to teach them how to be better fighters, because apparently the players on the Flyers aren't real good fighters, and we're going to bring in a fighting instructor to teach everyone how to fight. So there is an intrinsic value, an intrinsic quality to having a tough guy on your team. It's just that, Reeves is single dimensional, and Wilson can actually find the back of the net. And I think deep down, they've always had a respect for one another. Even in the heat of the moment, Wilson said in 2020, quote, "If he was on my team, we'd probably be pals," unquote. Well, guess what? They're acting like teammates now, even if they wear different sweaters. And I know, they're saying this agape love, this kumbaya right now. But whenever the Capitals play the Sharks, if in fact Reeves is still playing on the Sharks at that point, that there'll probably be a mix-up. Despite the fact that they're best friends forever right now, I think that could change. But at the end of the day, it's cool to see. It's good for the league, honestly, because these kind of rivalries and the way they evolve, that's what gives the NHL personality. You take a look at the NBA and, oh my God, I got to leave the game because my calf is sore. If you're going to be a tough guy, if you are going to portray that image, it's definitely going to be in the National Hockey League, the toughest. I'm going to say even tougher than the NFL. You got to be big. So the next time Tom Wilson drops the gloves, don't be surprised if Reeves is in the press box smiling and saying, "That's my guy." And again, I don't know what was going on at that interview on that podcast, but Ryan Reaves was in a loving mood where he was just kind of dishing it out for Wilson, a love fest, saying that, hey, if we actually hadn't been, playing hockey, we'd be best friends out there. It's interesting how things can change on and off the ice. All right, so coming up here after the break, the craziness continues on Locked On Capitals. Talking about the possibility, albeit an outside possibility, that Crosby or Malkin on the Capitals, the head wobbles straight ahead. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast, easy? Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need, so stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. Now, listen, if you're involved in the HR like I am, you're hiring, you're firing, you're dealing with people with paper applications, take the craziness out of your job and look to Indeed instead. And now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on the Locked On Capitals podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So crazy ideas out there about the possibility, albeit an extreme outside possibility. Could you imagine Sidney Crosby or Evgeni Malkin on the Capitals? Crazy, right? And Alex Ovechkin, it would be, I think my head might blow up if that actually happened, but let's dive into that in segment number 2, that was a story that was circulating out there. Ovi to Crosby could be the impossible dream. Could it become reality? And I'm just going to say it, and you can call me crazy if you want. What if, and this is, like I said, a huge what if, Sidney Crosby or Evgeni Malkin was a Capital? Yeah, let's let that marinate for a moment. Sid the Kid in red or Gino feeding Ovi on the power play. We know that the Pittsburgh Penguins, that they want to get younger. They want to kind of take a page from the Capitals book to be competitive, a team that, perennially is in the playoffs year after year after year. But this last season, well, they took a step or two back as they did not fare too well, near the bottom, if not the bottom of the Metro at the end of the season. So would they entertain the thought of moving on from Crosby or Malkin and the possibility on the Capitals? Now, it sounds insane, right? I get that. Like, this is the stuff you only see in video games, but there's a tiny bit of smoke here. So I'm going to just break it all down. First off here, we know that Crosby and Malkin are nearing the end, kind of a lot like Alex Ovechkin. Malkin's 38. We know Ovi's 39, maybe 40 in September. And Malkin in the final year of his deal as well. And all signs point to this being his last ride in the Steel City. And, like I said, the Penguins, they've missed the playoffs 3 straight seasons. And, their GM, Kyle Dubas, seems like he's actually going to do the thing no one thought possible: tear it all down. Penguins fans, if there's any out there, do you have the stomach for what that means? And what would you think about Crosby and Malkin being out of town? Now, there's been rumblings, legit ones. NHL insiders like James Murphy says Malkin could be traded mid-season so they don't lose him for nothing. Have you heard me talk about that before? I believe I've talked about that with John Carlson and others. You want to get value so they don't walk and get nothing. And then you take a look at Crosby, a bit younger, 37 years old, still elite, puts up 91 points last year, but there's a growing belief that Nick Kiprio said it all on air that if the Pens are bad after the Olympics, Crosby might ask for a trade. How many seasons does he have left, do you think? I'm not talking under his current contract, but 37, you got to think he's got a few years left in the tank. Got to think that him joining the Capitals probably would not be on the top list of his priorities. But let's break this whole thing down. We're not saying Crosby's coming to the Caps or even that Malkin is. There's just too many hurdles. No move clauses, deep history, fan backlash, and Dubas probably does not want to be the guy who trades a franchise icon to a division rival. But, and there is a big but here, you hear Ovechkin say himself, quote, if it happens, it would be wonderful, unquote. And what are some of the things we know about Ovechkin is he casts a wide shadow, right? That, Malkin in particular, I think would entertain the idea. Crosby might be a bit of a harder sell. Now, those comments from Ovechkin, the man himself asked point blank if he'd welcome Crosby or Malkin, and that's how he responded. So there is some love there, and it would be wonderful. Just imagine the power play. Carlson at the top, Crosby on the wall, Ovechkin parked in the circle, Malkin on the bumper, Wilson down low. Is it just a fever dream? Someone wake me up here. You're not stopping that. That's a cheat code. If that actually came to fruition, could you imagine what this team would look like? Now, realistically, and I'll say it again, it's unlikely. Chris Patrick wants this team to get younger, and adding an aging Crosby or Malkin, even though they are elite players, would definitely not fit the narrative. The team is trending towards prospects and high skill youth. And, well, Crosby and Malkin don't fit that bill. But say this is Ovechkin's last season, and I still think, despite all the rumblings out there even today, that it is his last season. Wouldn't it be nice to push all your chips in on one last hurrah for Ovi to get over the hump and win another cup? But the thing is, that could make it intriguing for the Pens is the Capitals do have assets. They have picks and they've got prospects. And they have the cap flexibility if the Pens retain salary. That is where the train comes off the track a little bit for me here. I would not entertain trading Crystal, Leonard, the upper at Cole Hudson, these kind of guys for, one season of Crosby or Malkin, despite who they are and their legacy and who they are. I still wouldn't do it. And some people might say, are you crazy? Crosby on the Capitals still wouldn't do it. A guy that's 37 years old, we don't know if it's going to be magic in the making on the Capitals. So I would not be too prone to that. But, so you don't want a mortgage on it. But as we get closer, to these decisions being made and the Pens keep sliding, this isn't some wild Reddit post anymore. It's a story to watch. You think about it, honestly, if Ovi wants one more shot at the cup, who better to help him than two guys that have already lifted one 3 times themselves? That's the flip side of the coin. That it's interesting, and it's what podcasters and writers talk about in the offseason, right? That how about Crosby or Malkin or McDavid or any of these guys joining the Capitals? Imagine. They are fun things to think about. Are they, even close to reality? Far from it. But I think that there is the possibility that Crosby could move. I think there is a possibility that Malkin might want another kick at that Stanley Cup can. More realistically for me, I could see him going to like Florida or something like that, or Vegas, at the trade deadline, something of that nature. But because a lot of these guys, you take a look at Brad Marchand, playing on a Bruins team that wasn't that great. Guess what? Went out to the Panthers and won a Stanley Cup. So it's far-fetched to an extent. But not too far-fetched. I think the far-fetched factor is the Capitals. Again, I think Malkin would be easier to convince than Crosby, but still interesting things to talk about in the offseason. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about a look back on Lars Eller and a look forward. straight ahead. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Wah, wah, wah. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups and keep the apps fresh. With new daily promotions and fun ways to bet, it's easy to use, fast payouts, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. So if you're a fan of the Nationals or the Orioles, or you want vested in any of the games in Major League Baseball, open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. And are you new to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment, we're talking about the Tiger, Lars Eller, and what he meant for the Capitals. And I want to think about the 2018 Lars Eller more than the 24-25 Lars Eller, it was nice for like an old friend to come back to the Capitals. But a look back on quite a career and the friendship with Alex Ovechkin and where he fits in with a Senators team that looks to be on the rise, or at least take some steps forward this next season. So let's do that. Let's shift gears and show a little love to legend Lars Eller. And I say legend, think about what he did, getting the Capitals over the hump, winning the Stanley Cup. Huge, because Lars Eller, like I say, the man that scored the Stanley Cup winning goal is on the move again. He signed that 1-year deal with Ottawa, $1.25 million. And while he's wearing black and red next season, his heart is still kind of here in DC. We know that he had a house in the DMV area. And when Pierre-Luc Dubois first moved here, he stayed there for a while, and he talked about how his garage was set up for practicing, taking shots, that kind of thing. So I think that his heart, like I said there, is still in DC. He said so himself on the Coming In Hot podcast, said DC is home. His kids are growing up here. He's training here all summer before he starts. And he's still soaking in everything that happened last season. What do we remember? Played on that troubled third line for the Capitals. He was the center. He was not too happy about the lack of playing time. And, like I've said on the show, if you're an everydayer, you know that if he played better, he would be rewarded with more time. Even if you're playing on a poor line, if you stood out to Carbs, he'd find a way to get you some more playing time. It's just that, Lars Eller is, on the back nine of his hockey career, shall we say, and depreciated goods, if you want kind of a hard take there. But let's not forget, the Caps went from borderline playoff team to first placed in the East. Young guys stepped up. Both goalies were solid, and Lars, he was in the middle of it, bringing that veteran presence. Something that's not easily or that you can at all quantify, that on a younger-ish team, that he was a voice that said, hey, guys, stick with me. I know what's going on here. He talked about Ovi's record-breaking season 2, said it was so important they got it done before the playoffs so it didn't become a distraction. And it's true, because the Capitals all season were hell-bent on helping Ovechkin get over the hump, catching, passing, Gretzky. And I think that they were so, laser focused on that they didn't even realize where they were in the standings. Because once that all happened, it was like the vacuum and the air pressure was sucked out of the room, and the Capitals floundered a little bit. But it is true. I'm glad they got it done instead of him trying to chase it down in the playoffs. And after $895, Ovi throwing around that money, Ovi bought everyone custom Hublot watches, player, staff, trainers. No one was left out. That's just the kind of captain he is, not just chasing greatness, bringing people with him. And luxury watches. I'm a bit of a watch guy myself. nothing near of that kind of category, but expensive watches I know firsthand. And, for him to do that, that was definitely, one of the things that makes him a captain, right? It's, being a captain of a team is you wear a lot of hats. The biggest hat is what you wear on the ice, but it's, being a good team player and a leader like that. That is ultimately why Ovi is who he is. And Lars even said they were nerding out on the bus, reading through who assisted on all 897. Apparently, Eller had 8 assists on Ovi goals. Not too bad for a third line center this year. So like I say, Lars Eller did not have the season that he was looking for, but I expect him to take steps forward as, over in Ottawa, Eller's stepping into like a mentorship role. Loves the mix of vets and youth there. He's tight with Claude Giroux, knows David Perron, Brady Tkachuk, reached out to welcome him. And get this, Eller remembers Brady and Matthew as little kids hanging around Keith Tkachuk during Blues practices. Wow, you got to feel like the old guy in the room when you start with stories like that. And, he's not going to get a chance to wear the same number as he did with the Capitals. He's going to wear number 89, his birth year, since number 20 was already taken. And, kind of a fun fact about that is he'll be the second Dane to wear it for the Sens after his childhood buddy, Mikkel Bodker. So it's interesting that, there's the Danish aspect of it and, that he stands out as one of the best Danes to ever suit up in the NHL, in my opinion. And I think that, the analytics point to that as well. So, you take a look at it. Eller's gone. He's not gone. He's just moved on to another team. It's what happens in hockey. And he's always going to be a part of the Capitals family, the history, the historic 2018 season. He gave us that Stanley Cup moment and helped Ovi make history. Just those alone in a vacuum are enough to say he's one of the best Capitals to ever do it. Stanley Cup, instrumental on Alex Ovechkin. For me, despite what we saw from him this past season, big picture, 30,000 foot view, a great Capital, a great hockey player, a great individual. And I'm glad that he was on this team. And, at the end of the day, I'm glad that he was able to lend that bit of a mentor voice for a younger Capitals team this past season. And best of luck for him with the Ottawa Senators. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL as they have you covered 5 days a week. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.